Greetings, students. Mr. Harrison here from school. We're going to go through the slideshow here on the metric system. Specifically, we're going to be covering three different parts of it. The first is what is the unit that we use to measure for each property. The second is what is the property. The third would be what is the instrument used to measure that property. So without further ado, let's get cracking. The first unit in the metric system that we're going to be talking about is called volume. And volume describes the amount of space an object takes up. So it's essentially like its size, how big the object is. Now for like a cube, it would be very easy. You just do length times width times height. It's the simple formula that you probably learned in math at some point in your academic career. If it's the volume of a liquid, it gets trickier, and that's where we use a specific instrument. And also, if it's an irregular solid, that's not a normal shape like this pen here. It's kind of irregular. It doesn't have a standard shape all the way around. So for an irregular solid, there's a way to measure it using the volume of a liquid with the same instrument. But it's the amount of space it takes up. The metric unit used, metric, not customary. And by the way, metric is the same as SI, and customary is the other one. SI stands for Standard International. Standard International is metric because we're the only country really that uses anything but metric. So the metric unit for volume is called the liter, or plural is liters. You might recognize the milli prefix in the word milliliters. That's on our drink bottles that we have, but liters is the measure of the volume of a liquid or an irregular solid. And the piece of equipment we use is called a graduated cylinder. Okay, looks like this, has a base like that, tall tube. Okay, graduated cylinder is used to measure liters, which is the unit for volume. Let me show you a couple things here really quick. This is called a test tube. It does not have any markings going up it. This is one of the things that people mistake for graduated cylinders sometimes. Test tube is not used to measure anything. It's just used to hold liquids. The beaker, which is more like just a cup, that is not. It's also not used to measure liquids. The one that's used to measure liquids is a graduated cylinder. Okay. Mass is the next property. Mass is the amount of matter or stuff an object in an object, excuse me, the amount of stuff or matter in an object. Whereas volume is the amount of space an object takes up. Mass is the amount of stuff or matter in an object. So take this coffee mug, for instance. It has the same volume whether it's empty or full. But when you fill it up to different levels with a drink, then it's going to change its mass. Okay? So like it's more full. So it's like your body would be the same volume. In other words, what its size is. But if you just ate Thanksgiving dinner, like this version of me here, you're going to have a greater mass than if you are starving and haven't eaten anything all day. The unit in the metric system that's used is grams. In the customary units, we use pounds or ounces, but not in SI units or metric units. We use grams for the metric system. The piece of equipment that we use, I have here, is called a triple beam balance. You might be asking yourself, why is it called triple beam balance? Because if I turn it this way, how many beams do you see? Well, that's 1, 2, 3 beams. And if you get to third base in baseball on your hit, it's called a triple beam balance. We'll go over how to use this a little bit later, but I'm assuming a lot of you have some experience with that. Triple beam balance. It's not simply called a scale. It's called a triple beam balance. Sometimes people call it a mass balance as well. And one thing I forgot to mention with volume is that in customary units, volume might be measured in things like gallons or ounces, but not in SI metric units. We use liters. Right. Length is the next property. Length is simply the distance between 2 points. It could be the distance between your elbow and your wrist. It could be the distance between Winchester and Stephen City. It could be the distance between two of your cells. It could be very, very small or really, really big or anything in between. It also could be from one end of something to the other. So you could measure the length of this pen. Length is the distance between 2 points. The metric unit that we use is called the meter. Obviously, if you've had any experience measuring this, you know that this isn't measured in meters, and we'll talk about that in a second. But the piece of equipment you use is either a meter stick or this guy, which is a ruler, right? The meter stick is like this, but like way, way longer. So the ruler, let's see if I can get this on camera. It has really tiny measurements here. Can you see what that says on top? It says cm. Then if I flip it, on the other side, it's got much bigger measurements. Okay? So the bigger measurements are called inches. That's what these are. The smaller measurements are called centimeters. Centimeters, we shorten it up and call it centimeters. Centimeters is the metric unit we use, or meters, but not inches. Inches is customary. The last property here is temperature. Temperature actually has a cool definition. We'll get into this in a later unit, but it's not simply heat. It's the average kinetic energy or speed of particles. You remember from last year, the year before, you learned about kinetic and potential energy with the bow and arrow. Potential energy is when you're drawn back, but you haven't released. And as soon as you release that string, then it's kinetic energy, because kinetic energy is the energy of motion. So the more kinetic energy something has, the more speed its particles have. So as you speed up the particles in something, it actually raises the temperature. That's why water boils, and it has a lot of motion involved with it. So it's the average kinetic energy of the particles in something. In the unit we use for the metric system is degrees Celsius, not degrees Fahrenheit. On your weather forecast, they'll always use Fahrenheit because the United States uses a lot of customary units. Not so in the metric system. Always Celsius. And there's a reason for that, which we'll get to later. But degrees Celsius is metric system. The piece of equipment we use looks like this. This is a thermometer. Okay, so just to review these. Sorry. Computer's getting a little glitchy. Just to review these. Volume is the amount of space. It's liters. It's graduated cylinder. Mass, the amount of stuff in an object. Grams, triple beam balance. Length is the distance between 2 points in meters or centimeters. And ruler or meter stick. And lastly, the temperature is the average kinetic energy or speed of particles with degrees Celsius. And we use the thermometer. So hopefully this is helpful. Please don't hesitate to ask if you have any questions whatsoever. And other than that, you're free to move on to the next assignment.